Well, recently we've seen headlines informing us that during the COVID pandemic, there have been an increase in UFO sightings. The U.S. government has even promised to deliver a report to the public on this. Are these conspiracy theories? Are they military tests? Or could there be something outside of our known universe? Joining us from Southern California is Dr. Hugh Ross, the founder and president of Reasons to Believe, an organization dedicated to integrating scientific fact and biblical faith. Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. Ross. So great to have you back on.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, this is actually a topic that I am very fascinated by. So with all of these recent UFO sightings, in your opinion, Dr. Ross, is there any validity to these?
Well, I think there is a validity to it. I mean, I wrote this book, Lights in the Sky on Little Green Men, with two of our colleagues here at Reasons to Believe on UFOs back in 2002. What's happening today is not just the United States, but several governments around the world has said they're going to release their classified documents on UFOs. But they've already released quite a lot. And I'm anticipating that the new releases are simply going to affirm what's already been released in the past, namely that there's millions of UFO sightings being reported, and most of them can be naturally explained, or military events, or they could be a hoax. But there's a 1% residual, and this is what's got the public fascinated. But what I've seen in my own experience of processing UFO reports is that where you got multiple observers in different sites, where you can actually triangulate the path of the UFO going through the atmosphere. There are times when they're recorded at moving at 15, 18,000 miles per hour. But as these observers see them going through our atmosphere, they see no heat friction and no sonic boom. And
Right.
there's 2,000 instances where these things have been observed going through the atmosphere and crashing into the earth. And when you go to the crash site, the ground is depressed. There's a shallow crater. If there's snow, the snow is melted. Vegetation is damaged. But when you investigate the site, there's no debris, there's no artifacts. If this was an actual physical craft, there would be debris that you could actually pick up. In this case, there's nothing. But you do see that something has happened because
Right.
something depressed the ground, something melted the snow and damaged the vegetation.
Could it be a meteorite?
Well, if it's a meteorite, you're going to find bits and pieces of the meteor. And when
Okay.
a meteorite goes through the atmosphere, you see a bright glow. There's heat friction. And if the object is moving faster than the speed of sound, you're going to get a sonic boom. The fact that there's no sonic boom, no heat friction, and at the site there's nothing to recover tells us we're dealing with something that definitely is real, but it's not physical. These things violate the laws of physics. And what's being revealed in the US reports are naval pilots recording these UFOs moving at thousands of miles per hour and making sharp right angle turns. A physical object can't do that. If you make that sharp right angle turn, it's going to do damage to the craft, and any being on board would be destroyed if they're physical.
Oh,
So, again, we're dealing with non physical reality.
right.
Now, when I was a graduate student at the University of Toronto, I briefly had as a professor Carl Sagan. He was extremely dismissive of UFOs, says they absolutely don't exist. There's nothing to them. But he had the worldview that there's nothing beyond physical reality. As a
Mm.
Christian, I believed in non physical reality. So that explains why I take the UFO data seriously and why people like Carl Sagan do not. Because God created this universe. He created it from beyond space, time, matter, and energy. There is reality beyond the physical universe. And the Bible tells us that God created two distinct species of intelligent life. We human beings that are constrained by the laws of physics and the space time dimensions of the universe, and angels that are not constrained by our physics and not constrained by the cosmic space time dimensions. So, what we document in this book is that we're dealing with an angelic phenomena. They are intelligent beings. They're coming to us from different dimensions. And I'm not alone in drawing that conclusion. I've known of 6 physicists who, like me, have devoted more than 10 years to studying the UFO phenomena, where we all agree, as I say, we're dealing with a transdimensional or an interdimensional phenomena. And therefore, these are not beings from a distant planet. They're not beings like us. They're beings from beyond the universe itself that are coming into our realm. And this has always been with us. I mean, UFOs are not new, they've been around for thousands of years. What's interesting is they seem to keep pace with our technology. So 100 years ago, people were reporting UFOs as slow moving dirigibles in the atmosphere. World War II, they were the Foo Fighters that were moving at 700 miles per hour. Today, they're being reported at moving at 18,000 miles per hour. And then when people have messages from these so-called
Yeah, I
beings,
was going to ask you about that.
well, it was Alan Hynek, the American astrophysicist, who coined the terms close encounters. And what he meant by that is where you get less than 500 feet away from a UFO encounter. And a close encounter of the third kind is where there's communication going on from the UFO being and the human being. And they too have been changing their story over time. 100 years ago, the message was, we're from the backside of the moon. And by about 50 years ago, they said, well, people don't understand. Life's not possible on the backside of the moon. So they said they were from Venus. And when the late public became aware of how hot it is on the surface of Venus, they said they were from Mars. Well, now their story is they're from a distant planetary system. So they keep changing their story. But I think what's most fascinating to me as an astrophysicist and as a Christian is there's actually documented cases where the UFO being puts the human being into a trance. And when they're in a trance, they do automatic writing. It's like they take dictation from the being. And probably the most famous example of that is the Arantia book. It's about 4,000 pages long, all messages communicated to this automatic writing, but about a third of the total content is denying the deity of Jesus Christ. So that's why we conclude there's a deceptive motivation behind these UFO beings. And moreover, when they do have close contact with humans, the effects are always deleterious. It's never beneficial. The
Huh.
best you're going to come away from in these encounters is recurring, terrifying nightmares. What's the worst case? You get killed by the incident. Many people have been injured. Some have even been killed. So this is not a friendly encounter. They mean us harm and they mean to deceive us, and they seem to have a motivation to spiritually deceive us. And that's also what's interesting about my fellow physicists. As far as I know, I'm the only Christian that's actually dedicated research onto this as a physicist. But the other 6 I mentioned, they all agree with me that we see here is a one-to-one correspondence with witchcraft, the occult, and demonology. And we talk about in this book, this is a testable scientific hypothesis. If you will close all the doors to occult activity in your life, that will be the end of your UFO encounters. On the other hand, if you begin pursuing the occult, these things are going to happen to you. And I went to Russia when the communists were still in control, the old Soviet Union. And that was a time when the Soviet government was sponsoring research on occult physics in an attempt to develop new weaponry. And what I observed when I was speaking there in the Soviet Union is a very high percentage of the population, and especially the scientists, who are having multiple UFO encounters. Today, that's virtually gone because the climate has changed. But you also see that around the world. Where do you see the highest UFO encounters? Equatorial Brazil, you see it in France, but these are regions of the world where a lot of people are involved in the occult.
Well, I think they're happening everywhere. Like there's really no place on Earth that they haven't been spotted.
That's true, but that's because everywhere in the world, you got at least some people that have connections to the occult. I mean, what I've noticed here in the United States, where we see the highest incidence is Hawaii and Alaska. But that's where you got the highest percentage of people involved in the occult.
Okay.
So the fact that we see a direct correlation between occult involvement and UFO encounters, I think affirms that indeed this 1% residual that defies physics and yet is real, uh, fallen angels are behind that phenomenon.
Okay, so you're saying that they're demons. So you, as an astrophysicist, you mentioned that you went to Caltech. You don't believe that in the entire universe that there couldn't possibly be another planet with other humans or other beings on them?
Well, I think it's possible that God may have created life on another planet. I can tell you as an astronomer, we've yet to see even a star that could possibly support a planet orbiting it in which advanced life is possible, other than our own star, the sun. Everywhere we look in the universe, so far, all we see are conditions that are highly hostile to advanced life. But one of the chapters I put in Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men is why it's impossible for physical beings like us to traverse interstellar space. Interstellar space is not empty, it's filled with particles. And if you move your spaceship at, say, 10% the velocity of light, you'll do damage to your spaceship before you get to another planetary system.
Yeah, but we're also talking about human spaceships too, right?
Right, but I mean, what we've discovered in astrophysics is yes, we can send spaceships to nearby stars. In fact, we have a plan to send spaceships to Alpha Centauri, the nearest star. But we realize the spaceship cannot be larger than 10 centimeters. If we make it bigger than 10 centimeters, it will be destroyed before it gets to even the nearest star. In fact, the plan is we're going to send 1,000 spaceships, each of them about 10 centimeters across, and we expect a half to two-thirds of them to be destroyed on the way there. But if 100 or so make it, we're going to actually be able to learn a lot about the planets that are orbiting the nearest star. So it's an exciting astrophysical venture, but the idea of sending a rabbit, or let alone a human being, to another planetary system, it violates the laws of physics. Angels can do it, humans can't.
It sounds very dangerous.
When you're moving at, say, 10% the velocity of light, you've got E equals MC squared working against you.
Mhm.
And so you get a lot of energy being transferred to your spaceship, and every little particle that hits will do some damage. And you're traveling, say, 10 light years. Basically, any spaceship bigger than about 10 centimeters across will be completely destroyed before it gets there. That's why we only send small ones, and that's why we send a whole bunch of them, because we know interstellar space is a dangerous place.
Oh, it's so fascinating too, though. What kinds of experience have you personally, can you maybe share with us any kinds of experiences that you've personally investigated, Dr. Ross?
Yeah, I've never seen a UFO myself, one of these residual UFOs, but I've been processing literally thousands of UFO reports. And it's because I was an amateur astronomer before I became a professional astronomer. So I was always assigned the task to deal with the UFO reports because I had a good knowledge of what the night sky looked like. So I could kind of sift out what's the planet Venus or the Pleiades, or what I call the chandelier effect. I would always ask them, okay, you saw six glowing globes hovering over the horizon. Was there a pane of glass between you and what you were seeing? They say, well, why did you ask? I says, well, there's a chandelier behind you. It's going to appear as six floating globes on the horizon. So that's how I would kind of help people understand, no, you really weren't seeing a residual UFO.
Right.
But I've actually interviewed people for whom it was the real deal, where, yeah, you could identify this was not physical, but it was real. And then I would ask them questions about their past occult involvement. And sometimes they would say, yeah, I've never been involved in the occult, but I would discover close relatives of theirs were. And the demons can work through your close relatives. This is why when King David took the throne 3,000 years ago in Judea, he confessed the sins of his parents to the Lord in order to break that link, that possible occult link. I have a chapter in this book on how to close the doors that you might have and your close relatives might have. If you do that, the UFO encounters will go away.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Ross.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.